All right. See Farsight's in the house. Custodian sound. Give us a thumbs up. All right. Welcome, everybody. Canhammer TV. This is September 8th. So, apologies for postponing yesterday night's interview with Carlos Kaiser. I was looking forward to it, but work and life beat me up and just could not get it done. So that will be next week, I believe Monday, but look out for the schedule. So that was supposed to be episode 35 of Tactica. So today, which was supposed to be 36, will in fact be episode 35, in case for those people keeping track. And we will carry on as scheduled tonight with our unit deep dive number 2 into the shield captains. So I've broadened it to include all shield captains as opposed to just the shield captain on bike. So we'll cover the whole of the shield captain thing tonight. So second apology or errata is for whatever reason last week I kept saying Trajan was 195 points. He is in fact 190 points. And there you go. So, errata on last week's show. Okay. So, I hope everyone's doing well this potentially first day of school for some people. My daughter doesn't start till next week, and some people have started today, and some people started last week. But fingers crossed for school and what happens. So, hope you're doing well and staying safe. We will be doing our episode tonight. Not much happening hobby-wise since the last show. I've been very busy at work, and then the family was over for a long weekend, and oh man, it was busy. So, not much progress on the old Harlequins. Prepping for the next RTT, which is not this weekend, next weekend. It's going to be another 8-man RTT hosted by Dan at the Red Dragon. And this time it's going to be many of the same players, a couple of new players, including Dom, who you've seen on the channel, and one other person I can't remember now. And otherwise the same players, but people are kind of bringing different lists. I think we're going to have Salamanders, we're going to have Guard, maybe White Scars, Harlequins, a different Sisters of Battle list. So it's going to be pretty interesting. Admech, I think, is going to be there, and me playing Custodes. And so the decision is to either play the same list, keep going with the same list, don't change what's not broken, or switch it up and maybe play something crazy like maybe Carlos's list from his tournament. Who knows? I'm going to reserve judgment until I've spoken to him next week, and I have all the models and everything, so it would just be a case of whipping up a new list. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm loving my current list right now. Speaking of current list, if you want to know what we're doing and how I come up with these lists and how the lists change over time, you can follow it by joining the Discord channel, which is right there. This is the Canhammer Discord. And on there, we have a thriving community of Custodes players as well as other things. And all my lists, as I post them up, are pinned on the Custodes channel. And so it's version 9.4.7, which is currently what I'm playing. Okay, so we're going to dive right into the deep dive because there's a lot to go over, and we'll get to it. I think I have 12 pages of notes, so I've been putting in the work for you guys to make sure this is as thorough and as complete as possible. I got good feedback from people after last week's show on Trajan. And people were fairly happy with the format and that it didn't miss any significant headings or anything like that. So we're going to stick with the same format tonight. If, of course, you have feedback for me, please let me know, either in the comments or privately on the chat or in the Discord, wherever you can reach me, just to let me know, because I want to make these as thorough and as useful as possible. I don't see us getting a codex anytime soon, except for maybe the Forge World book, which is why I'm kind of going to leave the Forge World units to the end of this series. But so hopefully this series of deep dives is going to last you for a long time. Okay, so we're going to deep dive both the Alaris Captain tonight as well as the Biker Cap. And we're going to deep dive them each, merits on their own, but inevitably we're going to compare them. They are both HQ slots. They're the same thing, basically, just different configurations. So it's inevitable that you're going to compare them, even though there's quite the points difference between the two, and maybe they play very differently, but that's kind of part of the comparison. The first thing we want to get out of the way is talking about the normal foot captain. So not Alaris armor, not on bike, just the barn door basic foot captain. So I think there's really only two reasons to take a normal foot captain for basically 10 points less. It is probably, I think it is actually the cheapest unit in our book. Actually, probably the Palace tank is 5 points cheaper, but it's one of the cheapest units in our book. Is 10 points less than a basic Alaris captain. So why would you take it if you need a captain and you don't have 10 points? It's a pretty fringe, rare experience, but that is one reason to take a normal captain, is if you don't have 10 points. The second would be if you really, really want your character to take a storm shield. So he, being a normal foot captain, can take the spear and the axe or the shield and sword combo, whereas the Alaris captain and the biker captain cannot take storm shield. So I guess that would be a reason if you really wanted to take the basic shield captain. That's about it. The shield, having a storm shield maybe opens up one relic, but other than that, and just making him super tanky, there's no real reason to take the basic captain over the Alaris captain. What do you get just for 10 points more in the Alaris captain? You get an extra wound, you get native deep strike, and you get Terminator keyword. And I think those three things is well worth 10 points. So I think without exception, unless you're really tight on points or you really want a storm shield, then you're just taking the Alaris captain. So we're not going to spend any other time tonight talking about the basic shield captain on foot. We're going to spend the rest of the night talking about the Alaris captain versus the biker cap. Okay? All right, now that we got that out of the way. Okay, so we're going to follow the same headings as we did last time for Trajan, and hopefully we'll catch every aspect of each of these guys as we go through. All right, first thing to talk about is, of course, roles and keywords. So they are both HQ slots. That's pretty self-evident. And they are the only kind of, other than Trajan, they're the only HQs that we have. The shield captains or Trajan. That's it. So that's important. So the shield captain, Alaris captain, has infantry, character, terminator, and shield captain keywords. This is important. So obviously infantry is important. And character protection, as well as the ability to heroic intervene. The Terminator keyword, which opens up a few extra stratagems. And Shield Captain keyword, which of course makes them able to shoulder the mantle. Please note that the Alaris Shield Captain, as well as the Vexillus in Alaris armor, do not have Alaris keyword. They cannot use anything that is locked to the Alaris keyword, which is mostly just the 2 or 3 Alaris stratagems in the original codex. So they do not have access to any of those. They do not have Alaris keyword. But the newer stratagems that just target Terminators would apply to the Alaris Shield Captain. Now the Biker Captain has Shield Captain, character, and has 2 keywords, Biker and Fly. So these are pretty important aspects now. So let's get into that a little bit. So the Alaris Shield Captain as infantry does get the ability to go through breachable terrain, which can be important. Whereas the Biker Captain as Fly goes over the terrain. And also, though, the Fly, the Biker Captain can move over models. And that's a big deal. That allows a lot of flexibility in how you play it, not to mention that it's over twice as fast. But the ability to fly is still one of the best keywords in the game. Now, the ability to fall back and shoot got nerfed in 9th, no big deal, but the ability to fly is still amazing. So, and it also applies in the charge, remember. So I think that's still one of the big pluses for the Biker Cap. The Biker keyword itself is probably more of a disadvantage most of the time than an advantage because bikes, they have certain restrictions about how they can move around the table and how they interact with terrain. They don't get all the benefits of terrain most of the time these days. And, the ability to not just freely go in and out of runes is a big disadvantage to being a biker. So the biker and the fly kind of balance each other out, probably a little bit still positive towards the fly. And so you end up playing these two characters very differently because of their keywords. Okay. So the other thing to keep in mind is that they're both shield captains, so you can't shoulder the mantle stratagem to either of these two guys. You cannot shoulder the mantle to Trajan because he is not a shield captain. So they're the only two things with shield captain keywords. All right, let's go on to look at a statistic on the stats, the data sheets. Okay, so they both have fairly typical Custodes things. So hits on 2, ballistic skill, weapon skill 2. So the Lars shield captain is a standard Terminator, so standard custodian Terminator, so moves 6 inches, and then has a T5, 7 wounds, and a 2-up, 4-up native standard kind of stat line, whereas the biker captain moves 14 inches, being a jet bike basically, and is T6, so 1 extra toughness, and otherwise the same, and they both have base 5 attacks. So base 5 attacks, as we talked about with Trajan last week, it's kind of lackluster now, but it is what it is. Both captains having 7 wounds is super key. 7 is like that much better than 6. 7 allows you to soak up 2 3 damage hits, 3 2 damage hits, 2 lucky Melta or las cannon hits. The 7, the extra wound there going to 7 wounds is a big deal. And so how many times, if you play Custodes long enough, do you have captains left on 1 wound just wreaking havoc at the end of the game? So that 7 wounds is really good. And there's still players, you're like, how many wounds does that captain have? You're like 7. They're like, what? It still surprises people how many wounds these guys have. So it's great that they both have 7 wounds. So, of course, the movement statistic of the biker cap is amazing. 14-inch move with an auto 6-inch advance, meaning he can move 20 inches in a turn if he needs to. And with the shortened table, it literally screams around the field. People already complain that all our Terminators moving 6 inches is fast. It is. But the biker cap is just super, super fast. And not having to risk a advance roll is a great thing when you need it. So they're both native 4-up invulns, which is like the rest of the army. I think you're almost always going to invest in at least 1 3-up invuln using relics, which we'll cover later. But there can be situations where if you're not using your characters aggressively, then you might forego the 3-up invuln. And we'll talk about that in the relic section. But if you're going to play your captain fairly conservatively, standing behind your front lines, just sending out auras, then you can probably get away without buffing the invuln. But if you want your captain to be involved in any way, almost certainly going to want to plump for that invuln. So both guys are tough. They're both 2-up, 4-up, or 3-up potentially, 7 wounds, at least T5. That's pretty tough. The biker captain is that much tougher. T6 makes a big difference to small arms fire, especially las stuff at strength 3, but everything else wounding, strength 5 things, wounding on 5s is important. It's probably going to become much more important when things like heavy bolters get buffed. But strength 5 is a nice threshold. There's not a lot of strength 6 weaponry out there, but if there is, you're wounding on 4s, which is great. And then if you're playing T6 along with T8 are the 2 probably most useful toughnesses for using Grim Responsibility, which is the Shadowkeeper strat. And I've used Grim Responsibility so many times on my biker cap to keep him alive. It makes such a huge difference at T6. So T6 is a great toughness, actually. It just makes it that much tougher. And then obviously you add 3+ invuln to these guys and they become super, super tanky. Just like Trajan. So, these guys are characters that can stand out on their own if they need to. And that's important in terms of how you play them. Okay, so let's go to shooting. Well, there's not really much shooting to talk about on the Alaris Captain. He's got the standard spear or axe shooting. But the biker cap now has become a lot more interesting. It was mostly before our book, before 9th, it was almost always hurricane bolters because it was kind of baked into the cost. And the salvo launchers were more expensive and there was not a lot of vehicles in play. But that situation has changed a little bit, so people started to experiment with the salvo launcher because now you can get the biker captain with salvo or hurricane for the same price. So I feel now, having used both captains extensively, that probably it's a meta decision. Since it doesn't cost you anything different, it's a meta decision, and also depends on the rest of your list what weapon you're going to run the shield captain with. So one thing to remember is the salvo has 2 profiles, but the flak burst profile is really shit. It's D3 shots doing D3 damage, and unless you're playing a lot of -1 to hit targets, it's really kind of crappy. So I just don't think the flak burst is good in almost any kind of situation, and a single salvo missile is almost always going to be better. But so if we're just comparing, and the shield captain on bike cannot use the burst missile net stratagem because he doesn't have a Virtus Praetor keyword. That's a stratagem just for Virtus Praetors. So I think like the flak burst is useless. You're either talking Melta missile versus Hurricane Bolter. When I've used the salvo launchers on the biker caps, I've always found it unimpressive. You're basically hoping for a lucky high rolling Melta to maybe do something significant. The rest of the time it's not doing anything or fluffs. I mean, you're still rolling that 1 or 2 on the wound roll. It's the rule of the Melta encapsulated right there. And depending on how you play your captain, also you may not want him to have the Melta missile. I tend to use my captain going around turn 3 onwards, getting objectives, kicking units off objectives. I don't want to shoot 1 Melta missile. I found it way more useful for him to have the Hurricane Bolter. So I think it depends on how you are going to use your biker captain. What else is in your list? It will determine which shield captain weapon you take. But I think both of them have uses. Just kind of depends on what you want to do with your captain. Just Melta is just very unsatisfying. 1 shot, you probably hit, 1/3 chance that you don't wound, and then you're like a decent invuln, just like it's just like, and then you roll a 1. It's just bad, it's just bad. Now if it gets upgraded to new Melta, then that might be something different. But as it stands right now, like a single Melta shot is just not great. Snoop DeVille, welcome. Project Spoon, The Red Viper, C Farsight, McSquigs, Black Ice, welcome everybody. Okay. So Hurricane Bolter still has lots of uses. Basically, a high reliability in shooting, 10 to 12 hits every time. That will still kill almost all forms of T3 chaff that you find out there. Guardsmen, NIDs, scouts, sisters, all that kind of stuff still dies very handily to 12 bolter shots. So I still find that super useful on the shield captain for what I use him for. There's no point trying to shoot into a unit of 10 guardsmen with 1 Melta missile. You might not even kill that guardsman. So it's just a matter of kind of what you're doing with. Oh, I forgot to point out tonight's t-shirt. Isfan 3 5-day forecast. Friday calling for hot. There you go. That's tonight's t-shirt. All right. Okay. So, combat, melee. This is where it becomes a little bit spicy. So, the both of them have 5 attacks, rerolling their own ones to hitting on 2s. So, they're both fairly reliable hitters. 5 attacks, as we've already talked with Trajan, is pretty lackluster these days for such expensive characters, but it is what it is. Now, the Alara Shield Captain has the option of running the spear or the axe. We're not going to get into the whole spear-axe argument. We'll go into that more when we talk about Guardians. But whatever you put on him, you got to find that you know, that's a difference of 5 points. And almost certainly, if you need 5 points in the end of your list building exercise, that's the first place you're going to skimp. So there's probably, over the span of many, many games, depending on how aggressively you use your Alaris captain, going to be a huge difference between which weapon you take. But probably for what he's wanting to charge into, it doesn't matter. So the spear does have the option of running the +1 to wound strat on him, but you cannot run the extra AP strat on your Alaris shield captain, because that strat specifies you have to have more than one model attacking. So, you know, it is what it is. And even with the +1 wound, later in the game, maybe you might think about using it if he's doing something important, but most of the time you're not spending that on one dude. So it is what it is. At the end of the day, both these guys, so the biker captain is slightly different. So he is strength 6 -3d3. So he's like a spear, basically, guardian spear. Except on the charge, he rerolls wounds, which is super good against both things that are less tough as well as things that are more tough. In fact, it makes that spear really crappy against, you know, T7, T8 without that reroll wounds. And you feel that if you get stuck in a combat and you don't leave without the reroll wounds, or if you get charged, the weapon is lackluster. And so keep that in mind. The shield captain on bike is way more effective on the charge, which is where Unstoppable Destroyer is so good. We'll talk about that later. So again, though, at the end of the day, both these guys have a fairly low number of attacks, 5 attacks, wounding most things just on 3s. And then you have, of course, the curse of the D3 damage. So, and any character with a decent invuln, or units with decent invulns, will cut down that number of attacks. You end up doing very little damage with these guys a lot of the time. They are not as killy as you or other people think. Now, occasionally you spike out and you roll 3 or 4, 5 or 6s and you get a lot of damage, but that is actually uncommon. Most of the time, these guys are not as killy as you think, especially if you put them into things that are tougher or have high invuln saves. So unless you can control what you're putting your guy into, it's just not as satisfactory as you would hope. And then when you start going onto things that have multi-wounds, 3 wounds, 4 wounds, and then have a 5-up invuln, then you really start to lose productivity with these guys. So overall, in combat, without any buffs or strats, these guys are a little bit swingy. They will reliably kill a couple of guys. They may not wipe a whole unit. I've had times when I've not even killed a guard character because of 5 invuln. So it can be very swingy with these guys due to low number of attacks, you know, wounding things on 3s, invuln saves, and then D3 damage. Never split your attacks with these guys. Never. Even if you're hitting 2 guard characters, kill 1 guard character. Do not split your attacks. Every time I've done that, I regret it. Do not split your attacks. You only have 5. Put them all into something that you want to kill. Never split your attacks. It's infuriating. Never do it. Okay. Okay, you know, because people usually ask, here's my biker cap. It's good. That's actually Samael's cape, and I just freehand some gold on there. But yeah, there we go. This is my biker cap. He's the dude. He's the dude. Okay. So abilities and rules. Okay. So both guys are OBSEC, which is great. Having a character that is OBSEC is amazing, especially mid to late game. You're getting onto the midfield objectives, or maybe even onto your opponent's objectives. You're making a cheeky charge just to get OBSEC onto an objective. I mean, having a tough character that is kind of hitty sitting on a midfield objective right in the middle who's OBSEC when all your opponent's infantry and OBSEC is gone, it is super good. And so that is amazing that they both have OBSEC. They're tough enough to survive by themselves, especially once the power of your opponent's army has been whittled down a little bit. And as we said last week with Trajan, you can sometimes even use them as shooting bait because they can survive that kind of thing, especially if they have the 3-up invuln. So it's great. especially on the biker cap being OBSEC, just jumping around backfield objectives, moving 14 inches and charging and harassing it around the back and around the sides being OBSEC is like so good. And it's something that your opponent really has to try and deal with. Okay, so they both have the standard reroll ones to hit aura, and that's fine. We don't need to talk about that anymore. We did that on Trajan. It's a fine aura, and most of the time we're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, so that's fine. We don't really need the full rerolls. The biker captain has a slight advantage here in that he can get his aura in more places because he's so mobile. And because his base is kind of this obnoxious oval shape, you can use that to your advantage to make sure you keep your 6-inch auras. You just have to have that in your top level of consciousness that you want to be 6 inches from this captain at the end of your movement phase. So keep that in mind, but with his mobility, you can almost always keep your guys in aura, whereas it's harder with a 6-inch moving foot captain. You can still advance, and obviously initially you could deep strike him in, but that is certainly easier to do when you have a larger base and faster movement, obviously. And if it's super important to you, you can always advance him, and definitely you'll get him where he needs to go. So the Alaris Shield Captain can deep strike. So he because he's Terminator, so he has auto deep strike. You don't have to pay CP or points for that, which is obviously extremely good. This makes up the little gap in mobility a little bit, but with the biker captain. But if you do deep strike him, he's not there for the first, turn, maybe a couple of turns. So you have to keep that in mind. So it's a give and take. It's a trade there. But the ability to deep strike is obviously nice. Most often you may use that ability offensively, but it's probably more of a kind of mobility ability. So the biker cap, has so much mobility, you never need to deep strike him. You would never spend the CP to deep strike him, and you could never spend CPs to outflank him. So he's just got so much mobility. There's no need to do any of that. So that's fine. Okay, and that's it. They don't really have any other abilities. They're fairly straightforward characters, datasheet wise. Okay, points. Okay, so this is always the difficult section. So if people have comparisons, we'll talk about comparables in a minute. But okay, so let's just talk points. So the Alaris Shield Captain is 110 points, 115 with the axe. Is one of the cheapest units in our book at 115 points. It's cheaper than the Vexilla. And, just a very reasonable points cost for his stat line, his toughness, and his hitting ability, as well as the reroll hits aura and the ability to deep strike. I mean, that's a fairly competitive points level for him. And, of course, as I say, if you're short on points and you need 5 points, then just cut that axe to a spear. No big deal. The biker cap, now we're talking more points. 175 points for either weapon. That's a lot of points. That's only 15 down from Trajan. Now we're getting into the territory of kind of elite characters like Drago and Valdus, things like that. It was 160, so I think he's probably, I would say he's still okay at 160 or maybe like 165. 170. We're almost in the right place. I feel like 175 slightly too high, 160 maybe slightly too cheap. There's a large value here placed on how tough he is, as well as his mobility. That has a huge value placed on it, is his mobility. But at least they have taken away the value in the Melta missile. So that's okay. So his points cost maybe could be slightly lower if we're really nitpicking. So we'll go straight on to comparables. So there's not a lot of comparables to the Alaris Captain. So if we're looking for a character that has 6 wounds, not many guys out there have 7 wounds, but 5 or 6 wounds at T5 with a decent invuln. Maybe something like that Death Guard character that Will was playing a few weeks ago. I think is a Lord of Contagion or something. 5 up, feel no pain. A flat 3 damage side. Lots of attacks. That guy was scary. Shield Captain is certainly not that. He's not half as scary as that guy was. But toughness-wise, a similar kind of build. I don't know how many points that guy was. But probably less than the Captain. But then you start comparing to things like Space Marine captains, chaplains, Thunderhammer, Storm Shield guys. These guys generally have good invulns. They have way more attacks and they do way better damage. So you're starting to think about comparing to those kind of characters at that price level. But, we all know that those characters are overtuned. All those is Marine characters. So I'd still stick to it that probably 110, 115 is a decent price for this guy. Obviously, I would like him to be cheaper, but... now, the biker cap, I found a very interesting comparable for him, and that's Samael. So Samael, if I remember correctly, is around 140 points on Corvex. Of course, he's like 200 or 210 on the speeder, which is, you can't compare. But on the jet bike, who originally thought it was the only jet bike left in the Imperium, so wrong. But 140 points, and he comes with a plasma cannon, two kind of storm bolter thingies. He hits on 2s, gives full rerolls. He has, I think, he has a 4-up invuln. And he's got a decent number of wounds, probably like 6 wounds. And his sword is ×2 damage on the charge and does flat damage. So I would say that Sammy compares very well to a shield captain on bike. Probably does more damage. Is not quite as survivable, almost. And has cool weapons. So there's a comparable there who's almost 35 points cheaper. Now, Sammy's not OBSEC, so how many points you put on that is a question. And, of course, Sammy cannot take Warlord traits or relics because he's a named character, whereas a biker cap can take all of those things as well as the command trait. So, you're spending 35 points on the extra trimmings there. But that's a decent comparable, actually, between the biker cap and Sammy on the Corvex. It's hard to compare him at 175 to other non-biker characters like Trajan, even like things like Drago, Valdas, those kind of guys who are quite expensive characters, but they're not on bikes. You could compare it to the much cheaper jetpack Space Marine captains who have Thunderhammers and Storm Shields. Even after the points nerf, they're still pretty competitively priced, hit very hard, super hard to kill, just a general pain in the ass, and super mobile as well as being infantry. And they can have Warlord traits and relics and all these things. So, if you're comparing again to the slightly overtuned Space Marine characters, then you're gonna cry a little bit, but it is what it is. All right, so those are the kind of immediate comparables that I found for these two guys. Mutant Deathclaw, welcome. Okay. So next we're going to talk about Warlord traits, and we're going to split up the Warlord traits and the relics because there's a decent chunk to top up here. We're going to do a separate Tactica episode on Warlord traits and relics, so we're not going to go over every single one here, maybe very quickly. What I'll do is kind of point out ones that are commonly used, and then maybe some hidden gems that people could try, and talk about these traits in general. So, your Warlord traits. All right, so Champion of the Imperium is still a great Warlord trait. It was my go-to before our new book. The ability to have a 12-inch aura of heroic intervention is amazing. And I usually used to put it on my foot character, but obviously putting it on a biker cap instead of the Alaris cap would be fine because you get that aura anywhere you like. Deep striking Alaris shield captain with this aura is cool, and it will save you the CP. Of course, we have the ability of heroic now for a CP, but it would save you that CP for something else. So that's still a great Warlord trait for either of these guys. Now, Peerless Warrior is exploding 6s. And I think there's really not much reason to run this just on a normal dude because 5 attacks trying to riff off exploding 6s is not very reliable. Statistically, you might not even get 1. And so that's kind of a waste of a Warlord trait. The only time I would see this is if you're running Dread Host Smash Alaris Captain build, where you're running a Dread Host Alaris Captain with the 3 damage axe. You're running Peerless Warrior. You're running All-Seeing Annihilator. So you're banking on 5 attacks exploding multiple times. And maybe even a double damage commander trait. So that's what we call the Alaris Smash Captain Dread Host build. And other than that, though, I think exploding 6s on 5 attacks is not good. Sean Stryker, welcome. This whole episode is on Alaris shield caps and biker caps. So keep watching. Okay, superior creation. This is now my current Warlord trait by default. I just think giving a 7 wound character a 5-up feel no pain, effectively increasing them by 2 wounds, maybe even more if you roll some lucky 5-ups, giving you some mortal wound protection is just really good on a 2+3++ T6 or T5 character. Obviously, if you combo this with the command trait to give him 2 extra wounds, now you're talking about 11 or 12 wound character effectively. It's really, really tough. It's like got more wounds than a rhino. So if you're looking for that super, super tough character that you want to go around harassing and being a pain in the butt, then superior creation plus extra 2 wounds is a nice combo for that. But superior creation is just a great all-around way of making your shield captain tougher and gives it some of that mortal wound protection, which we'll talk about later is one of their kryptonites. So yeah. Impregnable Mind. So this is a great Warlord trait. It lets us deny with a +1. That's really good, except now we have to put it on our sheet of paper, and it cannot be changed before each game. Over a course of 5 to 6 games, depending on your meta, you may only use it for 1 or 2 games. It's just a waste of a Warlord trait. So unfortunately, because of that decision, that has nothing to do with the game itself, that Warlord trait has become not good. So there's that. Radiant Mantle, again, with no stacking of -1s to hit, and most armies running a Vexilla with -1 to hit, make bringing a Radiant Mantle kind of a waste of a Warlord trait. Now, it does also work in combat, so that is one thing, but that seems kind of lackluster compared to some of the other Warlord traits. Emperor's Companion lets you re-roll damage. So being able to re-roll D3 is very tempting. It makes it slightly more reliable. It makes it a lot more reliable. But again, there's just a bunch of nicer traits to have. You don't really need it. And so probably not something that I would take. Also, there's the principle that I refuse to take something to mitigate this crappy rules writing of D3 damage based on principle. So there's that. Okay, and then quickly just running down the shield host Warlord traits. So if you're running these shield hosts, you may consider these Warlord traits. So for Shadow Keepers, it's the Lock Warden. I think Lock Warden is amazing if you're planning to use your captain to go character hunting. In which case, probably that would be a biker cap, because you need to be able to charge over screens and generally move fast to get to your opponent's character. So if you're running a shield captain on bike in Shadow Keepers and you want him to go kill characters, then probably Lock Warden is almost a must, because as we said already, with good invulns, 4+ invulns, 3+ invulns, D3 damage, it's so liable to fluff. And so being able to reduce that invuln save by 1 is super good. And so I think if that's how you want to play your character in Shadow Keepers, then Lock Warden's good for that. Okay, Aquiline Shield, Revered Companion. So I guess if you're running this shield host, you're probably trying to make your character as hard to kill as possible. And so running the Revered Companion might help you. But overall, depending on what's shooting at it, a Feel No Pain might be better anyway. Or 2 wounds. So I think this one's situational at best. Okay, so Dread Host, All-Seeing Annihilator. So if you're playing Dread Host, you're going balls deep into Dread Host, you want to run a smashy Alaris captain that we already mentioned, somebody's going to be running All-Seeing Annihilator, you're running Peerless Warrior on your captain, and then they're going to be bouncing 6s off each other. So you give him 3 damage axe, the full shebang. So if you're running Dread Host, then you do this. Solar Watch, if you're playing Solar Watch, the Warlord trait movement buff is good on either of these captains. Obviously, the mobility of the shield captain will allow him to allow others to stay in his aura much easier, and also his Hurricane Bolter benefits from it. So you could keep that in mind. But probably this is the reason that people run Solar Watch is for the Warlord trait. So if you're running Solar Watch, you're probably taking the Warlord trait. Emissaries. So the Voice of the Emperor, again, if you're running emissaries, you're probably going for the combo of the Vexilla with the extra aura range that gives you extra obsec. So you're probably not putting this Warlord trait on a shield captain. Okay. Okay, relics. So in general, when you're picking a relic for these guys, you are weighing up the opportunity cost of losing 3-up invuln. So by far, two of the best relics we have is the Auric Aquilus, which gives your biker cap 3-up invuln and reroll charges. Really good. And the Eagle Eye, which just gives you 3-up invuln, basically. And 3-up invuln on these tough characters is super good. Makes them that much harder to kill. Very hard to kill sometimes. Frustratingly hard to kill if you're dealing about psychology. And so everything else you want to take as a relic has to be weighed against losing 3-up invuln. And so if you can't deal with losing 3-up invuln, then you can't take any other relics. And then your choice is very easy. You just enter it, and that's what you're taking. And most of the time, Auric Aquilus, I can't think of the last time I wrote a list where I had a shield captain on bike and didn't automatically just put in Auric Aquilus as my first relic. It's just so good. There aren't, and luckily though, there aren't that many good relics for us to take. So that is good. If we had a whole codex full of amazing relics, it would be a problem. So these are some ones that you might consider dropping 3-up invuln for. Castellan's Mark. All right, so this is a relic that you put on a character, and it allows that character and one unit within 6 inches of it to redeploy before the game starts. So redeploy is super strategic and can be extremely powerful. And especially considering with how the missions are in 9th and the ability to really use your first turn well if you get the opportunity to first turn, but obviously being just a straight roll off for first turn, not giving yourself away if you get second turn. So you can deploy a unit at the front lines that forces your opponent to deploy a certain way, and then if you get first or second depending, you can redeploy. I've used it before with a Vexilla and a big bike unit. The bike unit threatens, and then they can redeploy back into defensive position or vice versa. So the redeploy is super good. And probably if you're running a character that you're not going to go suiciding into the opponent, 4-up invuln's probably fine. So I think Castellan's Mark is one relic to seriously consider. In my current list, actually, I thought about spending another CP for the Castellan's Mark, but then I'm down to like 7 CP to start with. I couldn't deal with that. But it's a serious thinking that went into my head on that one. So I'm thinking like a character, and it doesn't have to be a shield captain, of course, but that's what we're talking about tonight. Like a biker cap and a big unit of 5 or 6 salvo bikers with the Castellan's Mark. That's a big threat to deploy on the front line. And then if you go first, you're front line. If you're not going first, you can redeploy them back. So that's an example of how you can use the redeploy to your advantage. Okay, the Admona Mortis, which of course is the 3D damage, flat 3 damage axe in Dreadhost. Obviously, as we've said before, if you're running Dreadhost and you're running a smashy Alaris captain, then you're going to be taking this relic on that captain, by far. You know, if that 3 damage axe was just a general relic and not locked to Dreadhost, there may be some more 4-up invuln captains running around. That's all I'll say. But unfortunately, locked to Dreadhost, so you're kind of stuck to that style of play if you want that axe. But man, that axe is nice. And as we said last week, Trajan obviously just took the wrong axe. Okay, Solar Watch, Swift Silver Talon. Okay, so if you're running Silver Watch and you're running a Alaris Shield Captain, you could consider taking this relic. Because the relic is not bad. First of all, you take the normal Guardian Spear, so you lower your cost, and then you replace it with this relic. He now shoots twice as much and has the ability to just jump in and out in combat at will and shoot and charge, which is really cool. It takes you still back to a dude being 5 attacks, having a spear with D3 damage and all that sort of stuff that we already talked about, the unreliability of his fighting. But it does give you a neat little character to mess around with that relic. Okay, the final relic we'll talk about is Praetorian Plate. which I'm going to call a gimmick relic, I'm afraid. So maybe 1 out of 6 games you pull this gimmick off and it will be impactful. All other times you'll either not use the relic or it will not be impactful. The ability to just teleport your Alaris captain to another Imperium character, it's kind of gimmick, and I don't think it's worth giving up a 3-up invuln for. But, you know, you can try and play with it if you like. Okay, that's relics. Okay, strats. So like we did for Trajan, we're going to go through all the strats that you could use on these guys and why you would use it, whether it be something that you would use commonly or maybe something that you would use just occasionally. In general, because they have infantry, terminator, biker, keywords, there are a lot of stratagems that you can use on them, but it's really a question of CP. Sorry, I forgot something. I was just going to mention it. Okay. So it's really a question of CP and, you know, using CP on a single model versus like using it on units, right? So it's really a matter of CP economy. Most of the time you're not. But I do use stratagems on these guys from time to time, and it can be very impactful. So let's just go through that. Okay, Tanglefoot. So obviously your biker cap can't use Tanglefoot, but your Alaris cap can, and you have to remember that because you may be surrounded by vehicles or something, and then or bikes, and then you're like, oh, I need a Tanglefoot. Your Alaris cap can Tanglefoot. So please keep that in mind. Never forget Tanglefoot. Okay. So open the vaults is for relics. So should you spend, let's say you're running a biker cap and a foot cap as your 2 HQs. You put Auric Aquilus on 1. Should you spend 1 CP for the extra 3-up invuln? I think you have to think about why not. It depends how much CP you have and what else you're going to spend on and all those kinds of discussions as usual. Depends how you're going to use your captain. If he's just going to stand behind your lines and just send out auras and your shield captain is the one that's going to be doing the work, then maybe you don't need it. I think you think about it, and it's cool that we have the ability to do that. Shoulder the mantle. So obviously both these guys can shoulder the mantle if you have another warlord who just died. The problem is, and we don't know yet if you can actually have 2 warlord traits. I think that needs FAQ. But the problem is killing the warlord is not really a big deal right now. And so I don't think you'll often want to spend the CP to change to switch the warlord over. There's more important things you need that CP for. So I don't think it's a big deal. Indomitable Guardians. So Indomitable Guardians is the ability to interrupt in your opponent's fight phase for just 1 CP if you're on an objective. This can be super important. If late in the game you're fighting for an objective and the guard squad is just like, you know, you got 1 wound left, and this could be important. So just remember this stratagem because it's very key. Spark of Divinity, Fortress of Willpower. So these are the psychic stratagems. Of course, both these guys can use those, and so can come in handy. The biker cap as well, being so mobile, can, you know, if you really think you're going to need to deny something next turn, you could just get up there and do it. Piercing Strike. So if you're running the Spear Alaris Shield Captain, then you can use this to give it +1 to wound. So late game, you really need to kill something, and you know you got a CP extra, then you know that may be worth spending that CP in that situation. So, you know, that's something up your sleeve. The Alaris strats, the sniping strat, concussion grenades, these strats cannot be used by the Alaris shield captain since it's not an Alaris keyword. Okay, Castellan strike as well, making your axes extra AP cannot be used by the shield captain because he does not have, it specifically states you need to have more than 1 model attacking with an axe. So again, you cannot do that with the axe on the captain. Okay, Victor of the Blood Games, same spiel as with Trajan. I just don't think it's worth 2 CP. If it was 1 CP, I think it'd be a taker. But 2 CP being quite a situational application, I just think you have better uses for 2 CP, like 2 relics, command trait, stuff like that. So I don't think Victor of Blood Games is generally worth it. And definitely if you're going to do it, don't do it twice. Okay, even in death. So again, like Trajan, spending 2 CP to fight them on dying is situationally awesome if you have the CP and you really need them to do something. But, keep in mind, it depends. The shield captain on bike might not have his rerolls depending on what's happening. D3 damage still, so you better do the math before you decide if you're going to spend the CP. Okay, stooping dive. So the shield captain on bike can stooping dive. And what I have found in the number of times I have stooping dived my biker cap into multiple different kinds of units is there's almost always lackluster and a waste of 3 CP. If it's a unit that is easy to kill, chances are, except for things like Repentia maybe, they're not going to do that much to you in combat, especially these days with Terminators and defensive strats and things. So in that way, it's probably not worth the 3 CP. If the unit is tough and hardcore, like a unit of Centurions or Aggressors or Paladins, then spending 3P to send your biker cap into them is probably not going to do much with 5 attacks, D3 damage, and not worth 3 CP. So these days, I'm just trying it because I have Trajan's ability and I'm not using Homer, so I just use Trajan's ability on it. But I've still been unimpressed and wish I had Trajan's ability left for like a transhuman or something. So it's just unimpressive, and it goes back to the melee variability of these guys being 5 attacks, D3 damage. Now, note, if you do stooping dive, they can't. The enemy can't attack you if they charge because they didn't declare you as a charge target and you didn't heroically intervene. However, if you stooping dive into a existing combat, then they can definitely attack you. So just keep that in mind about getting hit back. But yeah, so generally, unless you think it's really going to help you, I would not stooping dive the shield captain into somebody. Yeah. Okay, if it's like end of the game and for some reason you have 3 CP and you need to get them onto an objective and there's like 5 guardsmen left, then go for it. Yeah, for sure, go for it. But, these are very situational things. You have to make your own decisions in those kind of situations. But in general, spending 3 CP to stooping dive the shield captain is probably not a good use of 3 CP. Okay, 10,000 heroes. Obviously, you want to use that for extra warlord traits. Arcane Alchemy, which is our version of transhuman. So if it's important that your character survives, then for sure feel free to transhuman them, to use Arcane Alchemy. It's fine. It will help them survive. They will probably survive whatever it is that you want them to survive. Just wounding on 4s with the 2 up, 3 up, 7, like they're going to survive. What I have found that on the biker cap, at least at T6, a grim responsibility will often be the same, if not better, in certain circumstances than transhuman for 1 less CP on the biker captain. So there's an advantage of the biker captain being T6. There's many more grim responsibility targets, and actually he can survive a lot that way. But if you need to transhuman them to keep them alive at some stage in the game, then feel free to do that. Now, Slayer of Nightmares is a nice strat, but spending 2 CP with just 5 attacks and D3 damage, probably not going to cut it unless the thing has like 2 wounds left, like a knight with 2 or 3 wounds left, and you really need to get them off. If you have the Admona Mortis, then you might consider that with the Smash Alaris captain and flat 3 and maybe exploding attacks, but situational. Generally for 2 CP with 5 attacks, like it's not a great use of that 2 CP. Okay, Emperor's Old Spice, again, like Transhuman, it's situational. If you really need it to save your captain, go for it, but think about it carefully. And Archaeotech Munitions, so making your single salvo do 2d6 take 1 away. It's super good if it works and you really needed it, but you know, you're going to cry when you roll 1 or 2 to wound, which is always going to happen, and you know it will before you've even rolled it. You know that Melta rule is going to kick your ass, the curse of the Melta. So it's lackluster, but if you really need it, you can do it. Okay, generally the other shield host strats are similar. Just make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, so Grim Responsibility. So Grim Responsibility is way less applicable on T5 Alaris Captain than it is on T6 Biker Captain. I've used Grim Responsibility on my Biker Cap so many times to great effect to make him very hard to kill. T6 has applications from strength 4 all the way up to like strength 7, and it's just a great stratagem for 1 CP on a Biker Cap. So Grim Responsibility, that's one of the only reason I'm still playing Shadowkeepers is that one stratagem. It's just so good. So Shield of Honor, obviously you can use these guys to protect these guys. You know, that's pretty self-evident. The other is Emperor's Hand. So again, you know, if your character is wanting to fight and do a lot of damage, you could use the Emperor's Hand. But, you know, situational at best. Okay. So that's the stratagems. I would say the most common stratagems I use on my character, like my Shield Captain on Bike, would be Grim Responsibility, number 1. Most common stratagem I use on him. And then the second would probably be just a command reroll, like a save, like an invuln or something like that. Those would be the 2 most common. And then occasionally I'll use like a Spark of Divinity or something like that. Okay. So we're going to go on to talk about the commander traits. So this is the sauce. I think this is reason to always have at least one shield captain of some variety in your list so you can spend that CP on one of these. So good. I think you just plan to always start a game with the 11 CP max because you're always going to want to spend a CP on one of these. So we're going to go through them all. Some are better than others. Some are situational. Some are really good. Some are not as good, but they all have their uses. It's a great list. Okay, Slayer of the Unclean, double damage on 6 to wound. Again, it's pretty situational to need a 6 on the to wound, where you're going to have 5 wounds at the most. So, you know, it's not that great. If you're running the Smash Alaris Captain, and you're planning on exploding on every 6 twice, and you're doing flat 3 damage, for funsies, throw this on for 6 damage axe. Go for it. But otherwise, it's very lackluster. Swift as the Eagle, +1 move, advance, and charge. I think this helps both captains. It makes the Alaris Shield Captain extra fast. It makes the Biker Cap super fast. Deep striking and doing 8-inch charges for both of them. Orc Aquilus getting rerolls charge as well on the shorter charge. So this is a nice trait overall. It just depends on what you want your captains to be doing in the game, whether you invest in making them faster or tougher or whatever. So you know, I think you know, that's a situational one depending on how you want to play your captains. Strategic Mastermind. So if you're running Trajan, you don't need Strategic Mastermind. If you're running some other form of CP regen, you probably don't need Strategic Mastermind. But if you're running Strategic Mastermind and you have anywhere from, let's say, 8+ CP to start the game with, you probably want to run Strategic Mastermind because CP is so important to how we play. If you have less than 7 CP to start with, I would think it's a trap actually to run Strategic Mastermind. It's not going to get you CP if you don't have the CP to regen it off of. So probably it's a trap to spend to use Strategic Mastermind if it's 7 CP or less. But if you have 8 or more CP, it's probably worthwhile if you're not running Trajan or some other form of CP regen. I would think that this is the default trait to run in those situations, unfortunately. Bane of Abominations. Reroll wounds against monsters and vehicles. It's very situational. The Shield Captain already rerolls wounds on the charge. I wouldn't see people running this trait very often. Indomitable is +2 wounds. So if you thought having 7 wounds was good, having 9 wounds is that much better. Now you're surviving 3 damage attacks, 2 lucky Melta las cannons, 4 2 damage attacks, and you throw a 5-up Funeral Pain there. Now you effectively have 11 or 12 wounds on a 2-up, 3-up, T5 or T6 platform. That's really, really tough. So again, people have been using this to good effect. I've used it a couple of times, but it is one of the better traits that we have. If your intention is to make your character as tough as possible, then this is probably the trait you want to take. Okay, Master Melee, basically you get 2 extra attacks if you're within a unit that has 6 or more models. I mean, that's okay to go up to 7 attacks. That addresses one of their weaknesses, which is low number of attacks, but it's situational. If you never fight against those units, you just wasted a CP, basically. So, situational. Okay. Unstoppable Destroyer. This is my command trait, default right now. Since dropping Strategic Mastermind, this is the sauce. I use this multiple times in every game on my Shield Captain on bike. So good, the ability to pile in and consolidate anywhere you want, D3 plus 3 inches. You get charged, no problem. Just get out, next turn, move, shoot, charge back in. You want to pile into that tank over there? No problem. Just pile in, bad touch it, no problem. Psychers to stop them casting. Go in a weird direction to get on an objective that was not anticipated. Getting back behind cover or behind a ruin or back behind your lines to character protection. So many uses of this ability, it's almost abusive. Now, it needs FAQ about the whole base contact thing, okay? I'm not going to go into that whole argument right now. All I'm saying is it requires FAQ. But even with that, people don't realize that that's how they may stop it, and they don't do that. And so you take advantage of that and use it. It is a great command trait. I think one of the best ones to have movement shenanigans like that on a fast, powerful, tough platform, especially late in the game. So good. And it really synergizes with how I use my captain, which is just go around clearing objectives off the side and back. Opponent's backfield later in the game. It just synergizes with that so much. He's just such a pain in the butt to deal with, and you cannot tie him down. So good. Okay, Defiant to the last. +1 attack for every wound lost up to 3. I don't want something to trigger after I've been taking damage. That just doesn't seem good to me. And Inspirational, add 3 inches to aura. I mean, this is nice. So what auras can you add? So you obviously make his reroll hits aura 9 inches. If you're running a acquired aura, like a Warlord trait, then that would increase its aura. So Solar Watch, Heroic Intervention aura, All-Seeing Annihilator, stuff like that. So if your army really depends on these auras, then you can consider this trait. But it may be better just to move, keeping your smaller aura in mind, and then you don't have to spend a command trait on this. That's my thoughts on that. You can just learn to move a little bit better. Okay, that's the Captain command traits. GW didn't have to give us that. If you think about it, like, how do we make your captain special? Like, they didn't have to do that at all. But they did, and I appreciate it because it's really good and adds a lot of character to our characters. So kudos to GW for that little chart there, 1 page, that gives it so much flavor to these guys. But they totally didn't have to do that at all. Okay, lists. Okay, so obviously you need at least 1 HQ in your list. And so there are combinations of running 1 to 2 HQs. Trajan and Shield Captain on bike. That's the combo I run. Trajan and Foot Captain. Foot Captain and Shield Captain on bike. 2 Shield Captains on bikes. Just a Shield Captain on bike. Just an Alaris Captain. Just Trajan. I mean, there's so many combinations. And really, what is best is what is up to you. What do you want your characters to do? Because all our characters, they're all good. What do you want them to do? How many points do you have to spend on characters? What do you want them to do? And so, what kind of list? Is it a super mobile list, in which case you maybe want the biker captain? Is it a plot up go up the board with a foot list, in which case probably Trajan is great? Is it a mixture? Is it all comers, in which case maybe one of both? So I think it really kind of just depends on you. The shield, they're all tough. The shield captain on bike obviously has the mobility, and and so there's all that. Okay. The shield captain on bike is probably one of the best HQs in the game. And then you load him up with a 3-up invuln, a warlord trait that maybe gives him 2 wounds or 5-up feel no pain. And then you give him the ability to pile in and consolidate in any direction, D3 plus 3 inches. That is one crazy ass character. And that basically costs you 175 points plus 1 CP. So that is just amazing. And Trajan and the shield captain on Alaris captain don't come up to that level. Of course, they're a lot cheaper, but the shield captain is, but there's so much there. And then moves 14 inches, can advance auto 20-inch threat range. Like, it is just such a pain in the butt to deal with every single game, and amazing. Yeah. If you really need the points, then you don't want to spend a bunch on HQs, then you run the Alaris shield captain. That's an easy choice then, and then you just pick a weapon depending on your points levels, probably the axe, and kit them out and give them invuln and go for it. But if you're running 2 HQs, I suspect one of them should be Trajan for the CP, if nothing else. But also all his other stuff, as we discussed last week. But I think if you're running 2 HQs, you run one as Trajan and then one as one of the other 2. The few times I've played without the biker captain, I've really missed it. So yeah, if you want to run other than very specific builds like the Dread Host kind of smashy Alaris captain, I think if you're running 2 HQs, Trajan and one other is a good combination. Could you run 2 biker captains? I think you definitely could. You just run 2 biker captains. You give them both 3-up invulns, or maybe just one of them a 3-up invuln. Only one can have the CC trait. And you can even give them both warlord traits. So with a bit of CP investment, you could make 2 very tough, powerful shield captains on bikes. And so that is definitely a viable way of running it. If you wanted the ultimately mobile, super cool biker caps. In a single HQ, in a list with only in a single HQ list, which HQ would you run? So, like I said, I think that depends on your list. If you're running a super mobile list with flying tanks and Venatari and bikers, you probably want a biker cap. If you're running a list with Terminators and a lot of foot slogging, then Trajan. I mean, it really kind of depends on what you want to do with your list, and how you're going to play it. So I don't think there's a auto take in any of these guys. I think it just depends on what you want to do. Okay. So, how to play these guys. So this is a huge topic. I cannot possibly cover everything about how to play the shield captain, Alaris captain, or the biker captain. But what we can do is cover a few basic principles and strategies about how to use these guys to maximum effect based on play experience and kind of what's out there right now. And then we'll go from there. And I'm happy for people to chime in what they've been doing with their characters. So, Alaris Shield Captain. If you're running the Dread Host Smash Alaris Captain idea, then you just deep strike this bad boy, Morady strat, and go in and wreck face. If you don't do that, you've invested a lot into making this guy as smashy as possible, and it's a waste. So if you're doing that build, that is how you have to run that guy. It's a fairly straightforward kind of build. If you're just running a normal shield captain in Alaris armor, then you have to decide how you want to play this character? What's your overall game plan? How does it fit with the rest of your list and your overall strategy to win the mission? If he's your only HQ, then probably you can't go ham suiciding with him, because you're going to lose a lot of effectiveness in the rest of your army by giving up the hits, reroll hits. So you probably end up sticking him behind your front line, and he's fairly conservative. If you have two HQs, like Trajan or another biker captain or something, then you could consider deep striking him. It's fairly hard to screen out 140mm base, and dropping your shield captain into your opponent's back line on turn 2, turn 3, capping you, scramblers in your opponent's zone, just standing behind a rune. Even if you fail your charge, you don't do anything, you make your opponent come back and do something to you in order to deal with you. And that can be difficult at that time in the game. And certainly if he does make his 9-inch charge into a backfield objective in your opponent's zone and takes on, the chaff there, that causes your opponent lots of problems. So that's another interesting way of playing an Alaris shield captain, is using that deep strike ability. But again, if he's your only HQ, you're probably not doing that. It's probably not a wise idea. Otherwise, he's just moving up with the rest of your army. He's making use of character protection. And then at some point, probably, one of two things happens. Either the rest of your army keeps moving forward and you need to leave somebody in the midfield, in which case your Vexilla or your shield captain is a perfect person to leave there. You're leaving an OBSEC person who's very tough, standing on that middle objective, and you got to come and shift me off this in order to get this objective. And so that's often where your characters end up, turn 3, 4 onwards. The other way that you play him, sometimes you leave your Vexilla back there, or a depleted unit that's almost dead, and your shield captain goes forward and now has a chance to have some fun. And so he ends up on your opponent's objectives, killing things using OBSEC, and so it can be quite fun that way. So there's a couple of ways to play your foot captain if he starts off behind your lines. And then the final way, as we discussed last week, in the same vein as using Trajans, you could use him as targeting bait to divert shooting. Because he's basically, with the threat invul, he's the same toughness as Trajan. So there's that. Okay. So those are kind of the main ways to play an Alaris shield captain. As a smashy guy in Dreadhost, as a backfield aura guy who then kind of sits midfield or keeps moving forward late game, or as a deep strike threat, who, if you can't get into your opponent's backfield, then deep strikes where all your army is and achieves the same result as the second guy. So, those kind of the main ways to play an Alaris shield captain. Okay, biker cap. Okay, there's a lot of cool ways of using a shield captain on bike. Maximizing the toughness and the mobility. And I think the coolest way to use the shield captain on bike, if I say so myself, is how I like to use him. So I used to use him as a suicide character, and I feel like that is not a good way of using him. Suiciding him into a unit turn 1 or 2 unsupported usually means he's dead. If you're lucky and he doesn't die, he usually dies the next turn after doing something else. And so the trade then might be good. But generally, suiciding him like that is not good. And it's really hard to resist doing that because of how fast he is. But generally would try to avoid this until later in the game. Basically, you can also use him in the deployment, because even if he's not protected by the character protections, if he's out of sight now, it's easy to hide them now with obscuring ruins. You don't have to worry about the spear and all that stuff. And unless your opponent has out of line of sight shooting or sniping, he can actually project force from a random part of your deployment zone into the midfield that you would not have been able to project otherwise, just by putting him there, and then he's fast enough to rejoin you on the first turn. So I like to do that sometimes with the shield captain in deployment, is I use him to hold a part of the board and project force into that part of the board, try and deny that part of the board with the projection of force there, and then he just joins me. So that's the deployment. I think the best way of using the shield captain on bike is turn 3 onwards. he spends the first couple of turns giving reroll buffs, projection of force to your front line, maybe grabbing objectives in the backfield or midfield. And then turn 3 onwards, as your opponent loses threats that are able to deal with your shield captain effectively, he then goes forward, flanks out to the side, goes into your opponent's lines, starts to steal objectives from his units using hurricane bolters and charges, unstoppable destroyers back and forth, out and in, dashing around using fly to max advantage to disrupt your opponent. He has to, picking off characters, he has to try and commit something to deal with this captain. And at that point in the game, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, he often does not have enough to do it effectively or efficiently while the rest of your army is still moving forward. So I love the shield captain in this role, flanking out to the side, going around to the back, taking on these little chaff units that are holding objectives, stealing things with OPSEC or just outright killing those units. And that's where the hurricane bolter really comes in nice in this role. And then it's just such a great way of using the shield captain. It's relatively risk-free, and if he dies turn 4, turn 5, no big deal. He's done what he needs to do, but it's a really nice way of playing the shield captain on bike. Otherwise, if he's just going to stay in your lines and be a buffer, then you probably can just get away with a normal shield captain, Alaris. You don't need the biker. So I feel like the best way of using the shield captain on a bike is to use that mobility as best you can. And because he's just so tough and fast and OBSEC and has decent threat. The other thing about the shield captains on bike is they have a certain psychology around them. Okay, we're going to dive into psychology again. Way back in the day of Custodes, there was a large number of lists that would run 3 shield captains on bikes as a supreme command instead of running 3 smash captains or 3 whatever captains. And so you had these lists going around with guard. Most of the time it was guard, and then there would be 3 shield captains on bikes. And there was an ethos around them that they were really killy and obviously super hard to kill. Now, one of those is true. They are pretty hard to kill, especially later in the game. The killy part is not so much, but they still have that reputation. So you can use that psychology to your effect in a couple ways that we've already talked about. One is the projection of force during deployment and the kind of denial of area. And then the second is later in the game, you make your opponent panic. They can't deal with this captain. It's super killy. It's super tough. What do I do? How do I deal with this captain? Right? And sometimes they get rid of it very easily. Sometimes they never can't get rid of it and it does its thing. But it doesn't matter. It's the psychology of this thing running around their back field, which is the important thing. Now, the one thing that really, their kryptonite is mortal wounds. So don't go diving into armies that have lots of psychers or ways of doing mortal wounds, because they will melt faster than you can say shield captain. That is really their kryptonite. The 5-up feeling of pain helps, but not going to save them most of the time. So being able to smite these guys is really bad. A few smites and they're gone. So that's their kryptonite, so watch out for those. Okay. Yeah, and an unstoppable destroyer really comes into its own in that role. Go in, hit a unit, shoot them, charge it, maybe don't kill it. They fight you back, does nothing, get out, go to kill that unit again, or go on to the next objective. Like, unstoppable destroyer is so good in that role. Okay. So as buff bots for the reroll hit auras, they're really good. As we said before, they have a big base, and so you can really flex that 6-inch aura out to keep your units in aura. So always keep that in mind when you're in your movement phase. How am I going to keep this aura intact? So that's something that the shield captain on bike can really help you with. And of course, like the other shield captains and with Trajan, he can be used as shooting bait, especially if you shoot him forward. Obviously, you're definitely wanting him to get shot then. But that is definitely something that he can do. Okay. So that is the end of our shield captain deep dive. I'll take questions on the Twitch chat right now, and we're going to go to the Discord chat. Do 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 do. Okay. So +2 wounds or unstoppable destroyer. Well, I think we answered that question. Is it ever right to take 2 times shield caps and not Trajan? I think that's perfectly reasonable as long as you think about it and making your decision logically. How aggressive is too aggressive? Well, we kind of talked about that. It's important not to be overly aggressive early in the game when your opponent has lots of resources with which to kill your shield captain on bike with. But later in the game, you can go ham. Okay. Okay. Linebreaker with 2 Terminator captains. Sure, but then you're either running 3 captains to still give yourself some buff and support, or you sent your buff bots into your opponent's zone. That might be fun to try. Why would you take a captain that wasn't Trajan or a biker? So we talked about that. Why would you take 2 bikers? We talked about that. Is there ever a call for 3 HQs? Sure. I mean, our HQs are very good, if not slightly expensive. So I don't feel like taking 3 is necessary, but yeah, you could. I think 2 is probably the sweet spot, 1 or 2. Relic use, we kind of talked about that. What are some of the threats on the tabletop shield captain should avoid? So mortal wounds. Yeah. Every other threat, so lots of like -1 spam can just chip off. Kind of chip damage is what gets you in the end, because you can just straight up invuln the big stuff. So yes, chip damage, mortal wounds. You'll shield captain a better warlord than the Vex. I think it's really up to you. I don't think it really matters who is your warlord. It just depends on what your warlord trait is and whether you want that on your warlord or on somebody else. So, and how you're going to play your shield captains. So if you're going to play your shield captains very aggressively and your warlord trait is like something that you don't want to lose early in the game, then you might have to change your mind. Can we deep strike an Alaris cap to score teleport Homer? Teleport Homer the secondary. I can't remember what that secondary is. Teleport Homer. Teleport Homer. Score 4 victory points each time a unit from your army completes the following. 1 infantry unit can start to perform this action at the end of the movement phase if it is wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. This action is completed at the end of your next command phase. Yeah, so you could, because you come in at the end of the movement phase. It's your turn, so you decide what goes first. So you come in first, then you teleport Homer, and then you have to survive, and then you get it 1 time. You have to do that 3 times, 3 to 4 times. So you can certainly do it. Whether it's good or not, I don't know. Okay, so that is it. All quiet on the Twitch chat tonight. So thanks very much for joining me, guys, for tonight's deep dive into shield captains. The next deep dive will be into the Vexillus Praetor, the Vexilla. Okay, so we'll be doing deep dive on the Vexilla maybe next week or the week after. Next week, probably Monday, we have our postponed interview with Carlos Kaiser. He's going to be talking about all he played at the SoCal Invitational, some crazy competition out there, and he did very well with Sisters and an Ares. So tune in on Monday for that. We're going to have a game next week, probably Wednesday. I think Francois is going to bring White Scars over, so that will be interesting. First time seeing them on the table. And then we'll be doing deep dive on Vexilla next week. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching. Thank you for supporting. Consider following, subscribing, consider becoming a patron of the channel. And we'll see you guys next on Wednesday, tomorrow night.